Hi, everyone. I'm Debbie DeMarco Bennett,
And I'm Catherine Holt.
and we are the co-teachers at DBTPath at emotionallysensitive.com. And today we're going to be focusing on something called emotion regulation, which is a module of dialectical behavior therapy. And we're specifically going to talk about the DBT skills related to emotion regulation. So let's go ahead and get started. So welcome to our presentation on navigating emotions with our online DBT skills class, From Challenges to Changes. As a note, DBT Path classes are psychoeducational and are not intended to diagnose, treat, cure, or prevent any diagnosis or condition. And with that, let's jump in.
So this module is focused on emotion regulation, which is a key part of dialectical behavior therapy, also known as DBT. And emotion regulation is one of 4 sets of skills that we teach in a DBT class. And the 4 modules are emotion regulation, interpersonal effectiveness, mindfulness, and a stress tolerance. In our class, we teach mindfulness concurrently. We weave it in within every module, so you don't have to wait to learn mindfulness skills for its own module because it's so integral to all of the modules. But emotion regulation in particular, I think of as lifestyle skills. They're the skills that a lot of people didn't learn growing up, or they're the skills that feel kind of missing if you feel like your emotions are like running the show. A lot of times people find themselves coming to DBT or needing DBT skills because they feel like emotions are kind of taking over their behavior and their life, or people have told them that. And emotion regulation skills are the skills that help prevent big peaks and valleys of emotion and help us swim in calmer waters. And so you'll learn skills in this module that are focused on how, on a daily basis, to regulate emotions so that there aren't peaks and valleys as often, but that emotions are normal, but not so extreme.
Yes. And I have to say, Catherine, that one of the ways that the emotion regulation module has really helped me is what's written on this slide. Imagine having more of a sense of control and influence on how you feel in your mind and your body. I think for a lot of us who, for whatever reason, didn't learn a lot of these emotional coping skills as children, can relate to having emotional responses that we feel in our bodies that can sometimes be scary, whether they're like symptoms of what we may have been told could be anxiety. So our heart racing, strange feeling in our stomach, tension in our muscles. And that's one of the things that this particular module gave me a lot more freedom with and helped me to feel a lot calmer in my body with, was to better understand, to actually have a background now in understanding what emotions are, from the physiological, biological sense to the mental, psychological experience of them, to just the entire human experience of emotions that we have. So that when my body is responding to something in the environment or something internally that I'm thinking about, maybe something from the past, a memory, or maybe something that comes on the TV that's frightening or triggering for whatever reason. And I noticed this in my body. In the past, before DBT skills, I found that that would cause me to go into quite a bit of a panic and become emotionally dysregulated. And with these skills, although they're these lifestyle skills that help us in the background to keep everything running smoothly, to best support our biology and our mental health for handling intense emotions, I find that these skills have also helped in these moments to understand what's happening. It's amazing that we're not taught this as children in school, like what our emotions are, how we experience them, how they influence our bodies, what we can feel when we're physically when we're having emotions. So this is a big part of it for me personally.
Yes, especially that feeling of having a little bit more control over it, because I think a lot of people who come to DBT feel out of control when those sensations, those physical or emotional sensations start. Because a lot of times when people come to DBT, they often have had the experience of feeling really out of control when emotions or the physical sensations associated with emotions are happening. And in this module, a lot of what we're talking about is learning to listen to emotions on one hand, and also learn tools to control them on the other, so that they're not suppressed, but we aren't only at the whim of our emotions, but that we can learn that we do have some control over them. And while they have some wisdom and we listen, we can regulate and we can lower the intensity if we need to. We can have daily practices, activities that help keep our emotions less intense over time. And I think that feeling of knowing that we have some agency, some control over our emotional world is really a big change for a lot of people who are coming to DBT, especially for the first time.
Absolutely. And, I just shared from my personal perspective. So maybe it's a good time for us to just let people who are watching know where we're coming from with our perspectives and our teachings in this class. So again, my name is Debbie, and I was diagnosed with BPD in 2010, and I've been in recovery for over a decade now. And that's something that I can talk a little bit more about, that yes, you can actually go into recovery from borderline personality disorder. Not everyone who takes our class has BPD or BPD traits, but a lot of people do tell us that they've been diagnosed or suspect that they may have it. There's a wide range of reasons why people need and use DBT skills, everything from trauma to bipolar to anxiety to you name it. So it's being used in so many different ways these days. But my personal story comes from my own need for these skills, not having received them in childhood, not having learned them, and then finding DBT, learning these skills, radically changing my life to the point where, prior to this, I had trouble keeping jobs. I had trouble keeping relationships. I was in and out of psychiatric hospitals and IOP programs. And that my life looks radically different now. So I did not want to keep this to myself. So in 2013, about 10 years ago, way before everything was online, I decided I wanted to bring DBT online, DBT skills, and started the first and now longest running online DBT skills program. So I bring a mix of having a decade of professional experience teaching these skills here, and my own personal experience of having gone through the process of realizing I needed the skills, learning them, and having a radical life change, and then wanting to share it with the world. So that's where I'm coming from. And again, I'm one of your co-teachers here at DBTPath.
Thank you, Debbie. And I hold sort of the other side of that. So while Debbie has this really lived experience of DBT, I am a therapist. I have a background in social work, and I have a PhD in depth psychology. And when I was in graduate school for social work, I did an intensive DBT training and internship, and then worked in a DBT oriented facility for quite a while. And I've been teaching with Debbie for years now. So I bring more of a clinical therapeutic background, and Debbie and I have woven and weaved together for a while. So we really do have experience bringing the personal and the clinical together in a really easy, digestible way for students.
Absolutely. All right. So now that you know a little bit more about us, let's jump back into how we can help you with our online DBT skills class. Catherine, it says practical tools up here, and you've said a number of times that you feel like the emotion regulation skills in particular are lifestyle skills. Would you talk a little bit more about what you mean by that?
Well, emotion regulation, as compared to the other skill sets in DBT, distress tolerance, interpersonal effectiveness, and mindfulness, are the skills that we're really learning to weave in on a daily basis. They're skills that are helping us learn to listen to our bodies, our physical needs. An example of that is a skill that we teach called Please, which is on treating physical illness if we're sick, eating in a balanced way, getting sleep, getting movement in the ways that our bodies want. And it's things like that help create a lifestyle of more emotion regulation. And they're less sort of quick fixes, but they're more kind of seeing our life holistically and learning really practical ways to start to move the dial so that our emotions have more regulation, that we're not on a very literal level. If we're underslept, then we're more vulnerable to strong emotions. If we're really hungry, we're more vulnerable to strong emotions. If we're not doing activities that bring us joy or pleasure, we're more vulnerable to strong emotions, So emotion regulation skills, as distinct from the other skills, are that more lifestyle, looking at how we're living our lives in an ongoing way. For example, just to distinguish it, distress tolerance skills are really geared towards, like, in the moment of an emotional crisis, what do you do? And those are short term, and they're not meant to be used every day. They can be if they're needed, but ideally distress tolerance skills eventually are more replaced really by emotion regulation skills. And so sometimes it's nice to have, I mean, obviously we need a mix of all these skills, but emotion regulation ones are the ones that we're going to be using on an ongoing daily basis.
That's so well put. And that is another thing I like about this particular module is the holistic approach of it. And in fact, in one of our lessons, we ask our students to evaluate the different areas of their life. So physical, mental, spiritual, if applicable, career, family, just all of the different things. And oftentimes, and this was true for me too, people are surprised to realize that an imbalance in any one of these areas can be the source or can be so contributory to our emotions feeling out of whack for and oftentimes if we're emotionally dysregulated, if we're emotionally sensitive, if we're having a lot of ups and downs, it turns out that we realize that there are several areas that need our addressing. And that can feel overwhelming at first, but I think we take a really nice approach with being supportive and helping to walk our students through step by step each week with the homework assignments, so that there's not this expectation of, oh my gosh, I just realized there's so much I have to fix. Well, that's true for most people when they start to look into their life and become introspective and see where things are feeling out of balance. But you won't have to do it alone. You'll have a supportive group, you'll have the team, and it's something that no one expects to happen overnight, and that this is a process. So yeah, I really like that this particular module takes all of that into consideration and our particular approach to it. So this next slide says, ever feel like your emotions are running the show? That's where emotion regulation comes in. It's all about understanding and managing those difficult feelings. And I talked about that a little bit when we first got started. Being able to better understand what we're actually experiencing is empowering. It helps us to feel more in control. It helps us to feel less afraid and to address what's coming up for us in new ways.
And as an example of one of the skills that we teach that helps manage emotions is the simple but not easy task of learning to name emotions. So one of the parts of emotion regulation skills is learning to identify emotions, because research shows that if we can name what we're feeling, it helps bring the intensity down. If we are feeling something in our bodies emotionally and we don't know what it is, it often can help make us feel overwhelmed, out of control, in internal chaos. And one of the core aspects of emotion regulation is learning how to sense what the emotion is based on what the emotion makes us want to do, which we call the action urge, what happens in our bodies, and other signals that help us learn, like, oh, this is what anger feels like, or this is sadness or disappointment or loneliness. And this is a little bit of left brain, right brain dialogue that creates regulation in the nervous system, where we might be feeling an emotion, but the act of thinking about it and naming it helps create more cohesion internally And it helps create a sense of like, oh, I know what I'm feeling, some internal organization, some internal soothing, even if the feeling is still there, our problem is still there that's causing whatever we're going through. But that's another part of getting off that huge roller coaster, is just knowing like, oh, this is what the emotion is. Okay, and now what do I do about it? What does it want to do? What do I need here? And often that is what people who come to DBT didn't learn how to do, is listen to an emotion and ask, oh, what do I need now when I'm sad? What do I need when I'm sad? Or I'm angry. What do I do? What do I need to do with this feeling? If anything, sometimes, and we learn that in this class around, do I act on this feeling or not? And we get choices there. And so that choicefulness is really, when we talk about having more control, that's what we're talking about, is that we can listen to an emotion, know what it is, and then we get to choose what to do with it, so that it's not like an emotion is coming out and then we act on it impulsively, but we get to really sense, does it make sense to act on this? Does this emotion fit the situation right now, given my goals for my life? Not that the emotion is wrong or not justified, but we do get to choose whether we act on it or not. And that is really revolutionary for a lot of people coming to the class.
So this is where another mindfulness piece comes into emotion regulation, when we're doing what you're saying of identifying the actual emotion we're experiencing and self-validating in that way. Like, this is what I'm feeling right now. This is what I'm experiencing. And having the support of people around us who aren't going to say, well, you shouldn't feel that way, or why do you feel that way? Or that's strange that you feel that way. Or, why do you feel so strongly? We're going to be like, okay, that's what you feel right now. And that is real. And whether it may make sense to someone else or even to yourself in this moment, that's what's present and that's what's here. So I love that self-validating piece. And I think that's part of what makes it, or what helps it to be so regulating, is because we are sitting with and being with our emotions, noticing what we're experiencing, and like allowing ourselves to notice that in that moment.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and something that I really think is unique about DBTPath is how non-judgmental the group and staff and team are. I've worked in different facilities with DBT. I've heard from clients their experiences of receiving DBT. Not that they're all bad, but I do think DBTPath has a unique warmth and friendliness around people's experiences. I think a lot is because, Debbie, you have such personal experience and really bring that and encourage that. But for people who maybe have done DBT before, I really want that to be stated, that there's a like a deep understanding and friendliness towards people who have really strong emotions. And I think that's a little bit unusual. So that's just an invitation for people who might be feeling a little bit uncertain, worried about judgment, worried about being pathologized, and things like that.
Yeah, I'm so glad you mentioned that, because that's so incredibly important to me. And it has been since day one, is for people to feel safe being vulnerable and being able to talk about these things that they may have felt like they could never talk to anyone else about, because shame would come up or fear would come up. And this is a safe space to do that. And that's what I want to always foster. And the whole team feels that way as well. So that if you've been struggling with something for many years and it's a behavior and you don't want to do it anymore, but it's difficult to put it out there because of shame or whatever, we totally get that. And so I see myself in so many of the students. And so if someone is really vulnerable, I really try to give them an incredible amount of support and kudos, because I know what it takes to do that and how important it is to be seen, like to bring it out into the light so that we can see that we're not alone in these struggles. We're not alone with these kind of thoughts or with these kind of actions. And we can be supported in shifting them if whatever it is no longer serving us and we don't want to do it. We can be supported through the remorse and the regret, and through, dealing with ruptured relationships that may have occurred from our behaviors. That all can be seen and we can be cared for in this space. And that's super, super important. So we've alluded to a lot of this already, Catherine. It says, without emotion regulation skills, life can feel overwhelming, unpredictable, and stressful. It can even create roadblocks in personal relationships. I've talked a little bit about how it showed up in my life, but would you give us some other examples of things that you've noticed in clients, things that you've noticed in students in our program, and just in general, what might be present for someone who is needing emotion regulation skills?
I think a lot of our students and even clients I've seen before come to emotion regulation skills for two reasons. One is because people around them have said, your emotions are interfering in our relationship, basically, whether that's a coworker, a loved one, a friend, like either emotions are they're chaotic, they take up too much space, they whatever the complaint is, or the person themselves feels like I can't move forward with my life because my emotions keep getting in the way. And that can look like so many different things. Like if I wake up in the morning and I don't feel, if I feel like a strong emotion and I can't get out of bed, then I don't go to work and then I lose my job. And that's kind of an extreme. I think we see a variety of intensities of that, whether that's I had plans with a friend and I keep canceling because I get too anxious in the afternoon. And then that friend is kind of like, I can't be your friend anymore. So we come at it. I think most people come from either being told this is interfering, or they feel they've had the experience of, I can't keep the things that I want in my life, or I can't get to where I want to go because my emotions keep getting in the way. And, another place that people often are told their emotions are problematic is by their family, their kids, their spouses. And we do have quite a few parents in the class who struggle to relate to their children, even their grown children, because of their emotions. And then when people learn the skills, they tend to say, oh my God, I wish I learned this 10 years ago. Or, oh my God, I wish I'd learned this 20 years ago. Like it's not this, the skills truly aren't rocket science. They're just missing.
Yeah.
And that's one of the, I think sometimes when people first encounter DBT skills, there can be a sense of grief or loss that these seemingly simple concepts just didn't happen in their lives, but they are available and change is possible from here. And that's, we do try to offer a sense of hopefulness of change just from where we are now. But I think that's another reason why people come to this module in particular is that, they're wanting relationships to improve, friends, family, but a lot of times it's close people in our lives. Even though I've never been diagnosed with borderline personality disorder or BPD traits, I remember when I was doing DBT training, it was a very intensive training and we had to learn it all ourselves first. We did all kinds of our own DBT work, our own chain analyses before we co-taught it to each other. And then, before even we were working with any clients. And I remember thinking, wow, these are really helpful too, So I think even if people don't identify as having significant impairment around, emotional health, they're still really useful because it is pretty rare for skills around emotional health to be broken down so clearly and to be given in such a digestible way. And so I use the skills, just to be really clear. And I do rely on them. I think about the skills and especially the listening to emotions and naming them, keeping my life balanced and my practices like just basic, sleep and eating in a rhythmic way help me. And I know that from my practice, but I want to be upfront about that too, because not everyone who comes to our class has BPD or BPD traits, like you said, but still kind of might feel like something, I could use a little something. I need a little help with my emotional world. And sometimes these skills are really what's needed.
It's so true what you said, Catherine, about how it's very rare. If I don't even know, I'm sure there are other modalities in different spaces where people look at emotions in such depth as we do in the emotion regulation module of dialectical behavior therapy. But sometimes people will say, when they're investigating and checking out whether they want to do the course, why is it 9 months long? And that's a great question. I mean, you can, learn DBT skills in a week or in a few days. Like you could actually sit there with a workbook and go through them, but it's very different to just read them and maybe understand them to a certain extent versus actually implementing them in your life in a methodical way, in a supportive environment, and getting that feedback of, each week we have homework assignments where you're practicing the skills in your life and then coming back and sharing what how the skill practice went, and if there were any challenges, if there were successes, and we celebrate those with you. And if there were challenges, we address those challenges. We help you to figure out, we reverse engineer what happened and so that you can be more effective next time.
And one of the concepts that we talk about in class that is really interesting and helpful for me is this idea that we have a spectrum of emotional control. And on one hand, there are some people who have what's called under control of emotion. And on the other side of the spectrum is over control of emotion. And traditional DBT is designed to treat what we think of as under control, where emotions, there's very little control of our emotional experiences. Emotions, like we have one and they're expressed or acted out, and emotions are kind of what it sounds like, less controlled. The other side of that is the over control, where we might have learned to, instead of being out of control with emotions, overly control what we're feeling. And that can look like being more emotionally shut down, highly controlled in our behavior. It can look more like depression. Some people associate over control with OCD or anorexia, those more like highly controlled emotional experiences. And both sides, though, suggest a lack of emotion regulation skills. So neither one are more regulated than the other, really. They both depend, no matter which side we might find ourselves on, they both show we don't really know what to do with our emotions. We've learned to either highly control them to not be as vulnerable, or we didn't learn to control them at all and they're kind of running the show. And so emotion regulation skills really apply to kind of anyone across that spectrum. And traditional DBT was initially designed to treat that under control side. There is a new form of DBT called radically open RODBT to treat more of the over control. But the idea still stands that we're learning how to listen to our emotions, express them in ways that are more within our integrity and more in line with our goals, and live our lives in ways that make sense for us and make sense for living a balanced lifestyle.
Thank you for that, Catherine. And we actually do get into this a little bit at the very start of emotion regulation in the first class, just discerning a bit more between under controlled and over controlled and how we can best support our students around all of this.
So DBT's emotion regulation skills provide strategies to, like we've already talked about, better recognize and understand your feelings, including the function of emotion, reduce emotional turbulence, and ease the suffering that intense emotions can cause. And that last point is something that we focus on quite a bit, is really distinguishing the difference between emotion and then the suffering around it. And sometimes by not understanding our emotions or resisting them, we create suffering, but that is distinct from the emotion itself. And that's where some of our mindfulness skills really come into play.
You just reminded me of an example that Dr. Linehan has given. I'll also mention that DBT, as created by Dr. Marshall Linehan, is a fusion of CBT, cognitive behavior therapy, and Zen Buddhism mindfulness practices. And from that Zen Buddhist mindfulness practice, Dr. Linehan has talked about how there's ordinary pain that everyone deals with. This is just part of the human experience. Day-to-day things happen. And so there's ordinary pain. And then if we resist and we fight against and don't work with the pain that's coming up, then we add suffering to it. So there's pain, and then pain plus resistance equals suffering. Another nugget of wisdom from Dr. Linehan, and that's again where the mindfulness skills come into play here, is because a lot of times we're not aware when we come into a DBT skills class of how much we are influencing our level of suffering and how much we can decrease all of that unnecessary suffering because we've never been given the tools. So that's another huge piece that I love about DBT skills, and in particular emotion regulation, is this ability to reduce unnecessary emotional suffering. We already have plenty of it in this world and on an individual basis, and we don't need to take on any more of it, whether it's because we take it on from the environment, from things that are going on the planet, from things that are going on from other people, from things we hear in the news, from our own personal suffering, reflecting back on the past or worrying about the future. There are things we can do to ground ourselves to reduce that experience of suffering.
It makes me think of a recent situation with a student we were helping with, where the student was going through something very objectively challenging, like really hard at home. Like no one would argue. It was overwhelming. It was scary. And yet, when we were kind of breaking it down to understand the overwhelm, we started to understand like, oh, there's the feeling of fear and what's going on. Like the situation is scary and stressful, but the student was adding this self-criticism that created a lot of shame. And that's one example of that combination of the situation being objectively super stressful, but the self-criticism around them, the shame around it, was what was really escalating the emotional experience into something really different than just dealing with a stressful, scary situation. It was like, totally overwhelming. And not that just naming it changed everything, but it did start to put things in perspective. And that's one thing that we talk about, is the difference between what we call primary and secondary emotions. And it's also how we work with suffering. Like that combination of stress and then shame and self-criticism is so like the recipe for suffering. But if we can start to see like, oh, I'm adding this secondary emotion, this what's coming after the primary experience, even just that awareness, that mindfulness can start to make it more conscious and gives us more choice of like, do I really need to be that critical? Would I be like this to someone else? Does this really fit the situation? Is this working to be this critical? And that's one of the examples also of working in a more mindful way to reduce suffering, so that it's not like every hard situation is paired with shame. I think we do see that a lot, and that recently came up.
I'm smiling because this just happened like a day ago or so, a couple of days ago. And this particular student and their experience has come to mind for me, and just at least I perceived a sense of relief, of acknowledgement, of noticing like, this is happening too, and I don't have to do this, like, and I can get support around this. So it was pretty huge. And if we're not used to, and most people aren't, if we're not used to parsing it out so individually, like to really dissect our experience, it's easy to miss these things and to just assume I'm just like an emotional mess, or I'm emotionally out of control, or there's something wrong with me. There is this overwhelm because there are different layers to the experience that we're having with an emotion. And with DBT skills, with emotion regulation and mindfulness in particular, we have these opportunities to really slow things down and reflect. There's actually a worksheet. It gets emotion regulation 4A. I believe it was 1A 10 years ago when I used to do it, because I filled so many out, Catherine. And it actually has us work with noticing so many of the aspects of the emotion that we're experiencing at that time. During this process, as you're seeing, sometimes we can notice that there's a primary and a secondary emotion. So just to like highlight that one a little bit more, it can be so liberating and validating and like this huge breakthrough to realize, okay, let's say I am so angry at my parents for XYZ that happened all these years ago, da 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 da. And I start going through and I start working with that emotion of anger. And I might find that underneath it, there's also really deep sadness, really deep grief, and all of this. And if that's not being dealt with, of course, we're going to feel out of sorts at times because there's so much going on that we're not aware of, that we're not self-validating with. I really feel that the mindfulness piece of integrated into emotion regulation helps with that so much because it gets us to slow down, pay attention to what we're experiencing, really parse it out, and really understand, okay, there's more than one thing happening here so that we can address it step by step, as opposed to just having it. I just picture this, for myself, like that's how things felt in my world. That's why I'm like doing this, before emotion
Totally.
regulation
Yeah.
skills. It just like the world just felt like there was a constant like emotional cyclone going through my head and through my world all the time. And these skills like really helped to calm that down. So I could see that we talk about this in DBT too, becoming the observer of our emotions rather than, completely identifying with the transient temporary emotional experience. If you think of it as like a tornado or a cyclone, it's going to come and it can get really scary and get really intense, but it is eventually, inevitably going to dissipate and move on. And the same is true for our intense emotions. And so working with emotions in this way can allow for that type of experience of them. So where we're not completely at the mercy of them or feeling like we are our emotions or that there's something wrong with us, we start to see emotions as these very human, also very transient experiences that we can experience and not have them dictate our next move or our entire lives. So it's pretty big.
Right. Also, without invalidating them.
Excuse
I
me.
think that's kind of a new idea too, that we can know that our emotions are temporary and they still have information for us. So sometimes I think when people are brand new to DBT and they hear, okay, we're going to learn to control emotions, sometimes we have students who feel like we're saying that emotions are important or they're invalid, or we're saying they should go away. And it takes some time to learn that that's really not what DBT or, we as DBT conduits are saying. It's that we're learning to listen and understand that they are temporary. Otherwise, if you think of the last time you had an emotion, just notice you're probably not in it right now, or at least a strong one. Like, while you're watching this, maybe you are, but likely you're not, or maybe a different experience is happening. So we're just sort of honoring the reality of that so that we can listen to an emotion, know that it's temporary. And that's the Zen idea, is that we have a present experience, and even the present experience will end no matter what's happening in it. So, yeah.
Yeah, that's one of the things that presents a huge challenge for people who are emotionally sensitive, is this other piece that emotion regulation skills bring to light, is that when you're having really intense emotions, especially emotions that are uncomfortable, like sadness, anger, that if let's say sadness, for example, if we, and this is often the case for people who have dysregulated emotions, if we in a moment feel despair and sadness, and it seems to us that it's never going to end, which can be like the actual perspective that we have in that moment, especially if we've had recurring intense emotions, it can, even though we have that evidence that emotions don't last forever, in that actual moment, the intensity of it can be so intense that the urge is to do something to feel better now. And if we haven't learned DBT skills, a lot of times that behavior that follows that urge is something that will help us, and that's why we do it, that may really help us to feel better in that instant and to bring some relief in that moment. But ultimately, a lot of those behaviors have short and long-term consequences after that. With DBT skills, we start to realize, as we start to have these experiences of noticing that our emotions don't last forever and beginning to remind ourselves of that and have tools to use in those moments when we start to feel like it's never going to end and it's feeling too intense, that radically changes everything, because we're no longer relying on the behaviors that haven't been serving us, that have been interfering with our relationships, with our ability to work, with whatever it might be in your unique situation. And we're changing how we respond in those moments.
Right. So, yeah, we get more choice. And that's really profound, is to feel like there is choice within emotional experiences.
So by joining our class, you'll learn to manage emotional ups and downs, improve your relationships, and transform emotional challenges into personal growth. And we're really excited for you to step onto this journey with us.
We want you to join. So in terms of what you'll learn in our emotion regulation skills class, we always start every class with a mindfulness practice. So mindfulness of breath and body sensations is one of the first things you'll learn. And we start the class that way. You also hear new skills and practices in our midweek materials that are emailed to you every week, sort of as a bridge between classes. And once a month, I teach a Wise Mind workshop that is pretty creative, unique for a DBT class. We often will use movement or journaling, creative practices, contemplative practices to start to listen to this idea that we talk about in DBT called Wise Mind, which is really our intuition, our deeper self. And it's the place that can balance logic, or what we call rational mind, and emotional mind. And Wise Mind is this sort of synthesis, but also deeper part of ourselves. And the workshop and midweek materials and mindfulness practice really is all designed to start to help us tap into that deep wisdom that we all hold within.
Yes, I really love that unique aspect of the Wise Mind workshop that you bring, Catherine. We're also really going to be focusing on life and wellness supporting skills. So we talked about it a bit, but that understanding that mind-body connection and how that knowledge can help us to best support our emotional well-being and regulation. Assessing life balances and addressing imbalances, again, something we talked about at the top, where we really take the time to look at the different aspects of our lives to see what's feeling out of balance and start to take into consideration how we can bring balance to those areas. And then this huge focus on feeling better mentally through various actions, physically, mentally, and spiritually, which we will learn skills for and be practicing together each week.
And something else you'll learn are grounding techniques. So you'll learn how to better understand what's happening in your mind and your body when you're triggered or dysregulated, and how to ground and regulate. You might have heard this term grounding before, and it can sound kind of amorphous and unclear. But in our class, we'll really break it down so that you have an experience of understanding what it actually means, so that you know how to do it. And so that that kind of mental, emotional chaos lands. And so when we talk about grounding, it's landing, feeling your feet on the ground, feeling your body, and feeling like the emotions aren't chaotic and out of control, but grounded, landed. And usually we can make better decisions when we're in that place.
Absolutely. So what's it like to take a class at DBTPath? We have our online class every week at 4 p.m. Pacific, with an optional pre-class chat at 3:30 p.m., which is just typing in to a group chat with students from around the world, as well as team members, if that's something that's interesting for you. And no cams are required during the class. It is taught lecture style. So Catherine and I are teaching through various forms of multimedia on the screen. There's a short live Q&A at the end as well. Then most of the interaction happens in our study hall forum during the week.
So in addition to the weekly class, you have access to the study hall forum, which is where you'll post your weekly homework, any questions that you have on the question thread. It's where you'll find your midweek materials, and a weekend thread, which is where you can reply and comment, just to have some additional support over the weekends, because sometimes that can be a hard time for people. And it's encrypted, and you don't have to have any kind of social media to be a part of it.
And we touched upon this as well. In addition to your weekly class, as part of your tuition, you have access to our Zoom bonuses, which include something called DBT, which is a Q&A on Zoom face-to-face opportunity to ask questions about skills and receive answers from Catherine, myself, other students, if you feel comfortable receiving them from other students. The Wise Mind workshop that Catherine spoke briefly about, and also somatics with Serena. So we have a somatics educator who is absolutely amazing and who teaches about how trauma is stored in the body, in the physiology, and guides us through these little micro movements to help to ease some of that out of the body. And it's a really amazing opportunity that I find really complementary to the work that we do, that's so cerebral and also talking and thinking. This is more just like being and allowing ourselves to be in our body and feel and to let go. And I find it incredibly soothing, and I've worked with Serena in person and have known her for many years. And it's just very exciting that you all have access to that opportunity as well as a student at DBTPath.
At the end of your DBT journey, you are considered a DBTPath graduate. And graduates of the full 9-month course are invited to a graduates only ceremony that Debbie and I hold, and along with other team members who are able to join. And you retain access to all the bonus workshops. So you can come to any of the bonus workshops after you graduate at no charge. And you have continued connection with your peers in that way. You also receive a certificate of completion to honor your personal development achievement. And we do have graduates who come to our bonuses, and it's so nice to see familiar faces there.
It's so wonderful to keep that continuation of community and connection, and not to feel like, okay, well, the 9 months are up and now I'm just out of here and I lose all the connections that I've made. And you do have continued access to study hall. You're no longer submitting homework assignments unless you choose to re-enroll, but you'll still be able to participate in the weekend thread, for example, and continue to have conversations with the people you've built relationships with, if that's appealing to you. So on our website, if you head to emotionallysensitive.com/reviews or click on video testimonials at the top of the site, you will see lots of videos from our students who wanted you to know what their experience has been like and encourage you to consider embarking on this journey as well. We have one example to share with you today. Okay, so let's go ahead and have a watch.
Hi, everybody. My name is Amy, and I just finished my first 12-week session at DBTPath at emotionallysensitive.com. And I just wanted to let other people know what an impact it had on me, and hopefully encourage you to sign up if you're on the fence about it. I was just coming off of a divorce and having a lot of intense emotions that I could tell were impacting other areas of my life, my own life, and I knew that I needed to make a change if things were going to improve. And so I took the plunge and took this class, and it was way more effective and way easier than I expected. The online setup was super easy. There's great tech support. I'm not a techie person, and I found it super easy to use. All the handouts, extracurricular things, chats on the side of class were fabulous. Not to mention the co-leaders I was really impressed with. Catherine brings a lot of schooling and knowledge to the table from her practice. And then Debbie brings a lot of, she's got her PhD in life because she's experienced a lot of these same emotions and feelings. So she knows where you're coming from. So those two aspects combined have been amazing. And I really just think it's something that should be taught in school. And for whatever reason, we didn't learn it as children, and now's our chance. So I would highly encourage anybody who's on the fence to go ahead and take the leap. You won't be disappointed. Thanks.
I love that so much.
Oh, Yeah, that's so amazing. Yeah, to hear. We'd love to have you join us at DBTPath. So enroll now at emotionallysensitive.com.
We look forward to having you in class with us soon. Thank you. Bye for
Bye
now.
bye.